G'day cobbers, I've got an absolutely top video for all you blokes and Sheilas out there who are into ridgy-dig Aussie valve amplifiers. Now we all know that back in the day the Septics made some pretty decent valve guitar amplifiers, but here down in the bottom half of the planet we made some pretty decent gear back in the day, and I've got a prime example on the bench. If you're interested, come on in. I've always wanted one of these 1960s Moody combos, and I know I paid too much for this one considering its condition, but I've got it and it's time to get to work and get it back into working condition. Let's just have a look, and there it is from the front. As you can see, an odd set of knobs on the control panel, quite a lot of corrosion on the handle, but at least it's still more or less intact. Now there's no back panel, so I have to fashion one of those. Clearly this has not seen any restoration. Look at the amount of dust down here. Eee. So quite a lot of cleaning to do before anything else happens. The cone is gone. The speaker is original, but the cone is gone, so the question is, do I spend $200 on getting it reconed, or do I put a replacement speaker in there? Anyway, there's a lot to do before then. Got to check out the transformers and choke, see if they're okay. This is a Moody 1712. That means 17 watts and a 12-inch speaker. Now let's keep looking at the exterior. So why somebody would drill a hole in the side of the amp cabinet completely escapes me. But not only did they do that, but they cut a dirty grade hole right through both colours of Tolex on the other side. Clearly some sort of panel was connected there, but God knows what they did that for. Okay, well, I shall proceed to tear this down and have a look at what other joys await me when I look further. Moody amps were made in Sydney in the 1960s, and I'm hoping to find a date stamp on one or more of the components in here to date this more accurately. There were two models made in this cabinet style. This is the Vibralux 1712, which is push-pull output, two EL84s, giving 17 watts through a 12-inch speaker. They also made a Vibralux 1012, and that was a single-ended amp with an EL34 output tube, providing 10 watts, again through a 12-inch speaker. Moody liked to split the chassis, so we've got the power supply with the heavy transformers in the base of the amplifier, and then up above the speaker we've got the preamp and control panel. And this was also done by Fender for their Tweed Bassman in the very early days, but of course they very quickly changed that. But Moody liked this arrangement, and they did this for a lot of their amps. Their higher powered amps, the GA35 and GA50, are much loved, but I'm happy to have this lower powered fellow. It's particularly grubby, and I expect in tearing it down that I'm going to be using quite a bit of elbow grease. Now there were never published circuits for these amps, and it's been up to owners to trace the circuit and then publish them on the web. And a local chappie, Mr. Tim Hickey, had one of these and has traced out the circuit, and that makes my work a lot easier because I've found a copy of that on the web. Well, after a quick wipe down, there are some identifying marks on the power section. Now we have a Ferguson power transformer, PF1576. There is information about these online, so I should be able to get more about that. And that looks like a date code to me, 1160. So end of 1960 would be about right. Now the choke only has this. This suggests that it's a 12 Henry choke, maybe 100 ohms. And on the output transformer, the stamp appears to indicate possibly 8,000 ohms impedance and 16 ohms output. It is a 16 ohm speaker in the cabinet, so that could make sense. Now, there seem to be far too many connections with this output transformer. While we're talking about the output transformer, I notice there is something embossed in the top, and when I illuminate that from the side I can see it's a brand name. It's a National brand output transformer, if that helps. Underneath the power section we can see that there is a socket for a rectifier, and a couple of diodes have been connected to that. So the amp at some point has been changed from valve rectification to solid state rectification. That was pretty common. These old grey Ducon electrolytic caps are almost certainly dead and will have to be replaced, and we'll have to go right through this and check all of the components to see what's up to spec and what's not. On the subject of rust and corrosion on the chassis, I'm not intending to do a lot with this. I'll rub it back very lightly with steel wool and then use phosphoric acid on the or basically rust stopper, rust preventer, rust converter, whatever you want to call it, to prevent the rust from going any further, and then probably just a little coating of wax on the chassis. Here's the speaker. I've just given it a dust off, and it's an MSP Alnico speaker, an early one because you can see the bolted on magnet at the back, and so it's a 12 PQ, 16 ohms. The voice coil actually measures 8.5 ohms DC, and I'm going to have to get online. There is a stamp on the, there it is, there's a stamp on the speaker cone. I don't know whether there's a date hidden in amongst that. I must say that the speaker actually appears to be in not too bad condition. There are a couple of little pinholes around the rim, and I'm hoping that this is going to be usable. Doesn't appear to be any rubbing in the cone. I think a bit of dope around the surround, and we might have a working speaker. Well, the search online tells me that this 3-symbol code here on the frame of the speaker is in fact a date code. The 2 letters signify the day and month, and the numeral at the end tells us the year. So this is 1960. So that combined with the date code on the power transformer confirms that this amp was made probably late 1960 or early 1961. Well, the power supply checks out. The power transformer, that is, it's supplying 275 volts a side. But my suspicions about the output transformer were correct. Lots of unknown and unwanted wires flapping about in the breeze, and it does appear that the output transformer has been replaced at some point in the past, and in the process lots of very messy changes to the wiring with goo all over them, and some errors, or at least some deviations from the original circuit. So I think I'm going to replace the output transformer, and I think I'm going to put in a multi-tap output transformer so that we can run the stock 16 ohm speaker, or there's the option of saving the original speaker if it's a little bit iffy, and putting in a more commonly rated 8 ohm speaker that we can run off. So that's plan A. Well, I thought that the output transformer was dodgy and was a replacement, because there were so many wires sticking out all over the place, like the head of the Medusa, and there's gooey stuff all over the connections. But when I removed it and turned it over, I find that it's stamped November 1960, same date as the power transformer, so I'm assuming it's riggy-dig. So now what I'm going to do is try to identify what all these other connections are for future reference. They might be, in fact, connections to use other speakers rather than 16 ohms. We might be able to connect 4 or 8 ohms as an alternative. So we'll see. So I've spent some time sorting out the output transformer. I plugged the primary wires into the variac and put a lowish voltage, in this case about 33 volts, through the primary, and then measured the voltages coming out of the various pairs of wire, which, as you can see, I've neatened up somewhat. And it turns out that the yellow and orange were primaries for US voltage, 110, and all the various secondary wires, none of these were suitable for a 4 or 8 ohm speaker, but they all provided different impedances for a 16 ohm speaker. The purple pair provided for a primary impedance of 4.4k. Then one of the pairs of green and black, which were actually connected, were for 5.4k, and the other pair suitable for 7k. So after consulting the oracles online as to which is the best impedance to choose for a pair of EL84s, the answer was depends on the voltage on the plates. But I've decided to go for the 7k primary. So the transformer is a goer, and that's what we'll hook up. And it looks a little bit neater now with all the spaghetti got under control. Well, here's the top panel from the Moody Vibralux. It has two 12AX7s, all the controls, and underneath all the associated doodads of the preamp. Now they have lovely shielding on the inputs, but I fear if I need to replace anything behind there, it's going to be a little bit of a job. I'll worry about that later. Now the two red electrolytics, which are part of the filtering part of the power circuit, I expected those to need replacing, but they look okay with no bulges, no gooey stuff coming out of them. I disconnected one end of each and applied my ESR meter, and I find that they are showing that they're in better condition than brand new units, so they're going to stay there. I do think I'm going to be replacing most of the wax and paper capacitors, and I have gone through and compared the values of all of the carbon comp resistors with the circuit done by Mr. Tim Hickey, and I find a few of these resistors have gone way high and will need to be replaced, but not many. Most of the components here seem to be within spec. So I have a little bit of a job ahead of me replacing those that are needed, and I'll be back after that. The components that make up the Tremolo circuit are all clustered around the base of this 12AX7, and typically with a tube activated tremolo you've got 3 capacitors, 1, 2, 3, and they're usually all 0.01 caps. Most of the guitarists I know like a slightly slower tremolo, and the way to do that is to change one of the capacitors to a 0.02. So I've changed this one here, which is reasonably accessible in case we want to change it back again. As I said, I've tested the electrolytic capacitor and it looks good, so for the time being that's going to be left in place. I did replace the old grey Ducon bypass cap because they are notorious for going bad. So that's that, and next we move on to the rest of the preamp circuit. Well, I found a plate resistor for one of the 12AX7s that was completely open circuit, so it certainly pays to check every component. I'm in the process of replacing the old coupling capacitors, the wax and paper ones, which tend to be unreliable, and I find there are at least 2 of them hiding behind the shielding, and I was hoping to avoid having to do it, but I'm going to have to get the big soldering iron out and unsolder here and here and remove the shielding to get at and check the circuit that's behind. Always something else to do. So here's the control panel and associated circuitry, pretty much fully recapped, and a couple of dodgy resistors replaced as well. Now some people would say that these large 3 watt dropping resistors ought to be replaced, that carbon comp resistors 60 years old are a bit suspect, but they're right on spec, they haven't drifted high, and they look to be in good nick, so I'm going to leave them there for now. I've left the shielding panel off for now, even though that might cause things to be a little bit noisy. I thought it's best if I'm able to get at the circuits to make any further changes. I think I'm just about ready to connect everything up and give it a try out. As you will soon see when my test pilot gets hold of it, this 1960 Moody Vibralux 1712 is now a goer. I'll just do a quick recap on what I've done to get this back into shape. First of all, there was no on-off switch or fuse on the original, so those have been added. You can't see it because it's out of sight, but I've also put in a little switch to turn the negative feedback on and off. Now sadly, the output transformer, the original one, could not be saved, and I've had to replace it with a newer one. Had to be done, unfortunately. A good thing, the speaker, which I had initially, on my initial inspection, I'd thought that it was a dud, has actually turned out to be a real goer. It's 60 years old and made by MSP in Sydney. I think what I will do is I will dope the surrounds of the cone. Let me explain for those of you new to that. Dope is the shiny, dark material that is sometimes applied around the edge of a speaker cone, because that's the part of the cone that does most of the flexing, and this is where often cracks and little holes appear. So dope is a flexible material containing latex, and that will strengthen and stiffen the cone and allow it to take more volume, more power. So all in good time, I will be doing that. Now the amp effectively has two channels. This one with the two inputs is effectively a bright channel, a clean channel, and then we have a normal channel. Originally the tremolo effect was only on this channel, but I've now added the tremolo to both channels, and the controls for that are here. The tremolo is quite fast, and after my test pilot has had a go at it, I may have to make a change to slow down the tremolo. We shall see. Now, another change I've made is the one knob tone control. The original tone control was very simple and basically pretty ineffective. So I've changed the circuit associated with that tone control to one that was taken from a very early Marshall circuit. It's the Marshall Specialist, and that seems to be working very nicely. Thank you very much. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of components have been replaced, mostly the capacitors and just a small handful of resistors. I have tried to keep the circuit as original as possible, but as I've mentioned, there were a few improvements that I thought made the amp operate better. So the cabinet, unfortunately, that will have to wait. I'm going to have to build a new back panel and somehow deal with the holes that a previous owner has seen fit to put in the sides of the cabinet. But that will be the subject for perhaps another video. And so it's time to hand it over to the test pilot.